they proceed with this conversation about 5 to 10 minutes. And at the end of the conversation, Indrid Cold says to Woodrow Derenberger, "I thank you, Mr. Derenberger, for answering my questions. We will see you again." Now a train goes by. See, the men in black are in on all this. They don't want you to hear any of this. Okay. So Indrid Cold, as he says, "We will see you again." Not, "I will see you again." We will see you again. And as Cold says, "We will see you again," the craft comes back down. Once again, it hovers about 12 inches off the highway, or the berm of the highway. Cold walks back up to the craft. The hatch opens. A human arm extends, pulls Indrid Cold back up into the craft, shoots back up to about 50 feet in the air where it hovers for a few seconds, and it shoots away at a very high rate of speed. Mr. Derenberger grips the steering wheel to his truck, and he proceeds to drive home toward his farmhouse in Mineral Wells. As he goes inside of his farmhouse, his wife promptly calls the West Virginia State Police. Not Woodrow Derenberger, his wife calls the police. The next day, Woodrow Derenberger tries to go back to work, which is impossible. They call a live television interview, and he's on live TV where he's interrogated by the West Virginia State Police, the Wood County Airport, all kinds of local media, and they begin to ask him questions about his visitation, his encounter with Indrid Cold out on I-77 and Route 47. And after those live interviews, and this is made public, Woodrow Derenberger's life spins out of control and turns into a living hell. And if you listen to some of these audio tapes with Woodrow Derenberger and some of the questions they interview him with, they began to ask him some of these questions. "Mr. Derenberger, what would you think if we told you the same story that you're telling us now?" "Well, I would think you were completely crazy." And they would say, "Well, Mr. Derenberger, do you drink? Did you stop at a tavern on your way home? Mr. Derenberger, have you ever had a nervous breakdown? Mr. Derenberger, do you go to church? Have you ever been divorced? Have you run around on your wife?" You know, so they go through all these, they try to trip him up, and they ask him all these questions. And during this interview, Mr. Derenberger continues to be extremely frightened. And at one point during the interviews, they say, "Well, Mr. Derenberger, if Cold was very pleasant and he was polite, why is it you still seem so frightened?" He said, "Because Cold said, 'We will see you again,' and that's what I'm afraid of." Later, Woodrow Derenberger claimed that Indrid Cold came back to visit him, and he would meet him at a place at Mineral Wells called Bogle Ridge, and he had several nervous breakdowns. Woodrow Derenberger did. He ended up divorced. The family moved away. They moved away to Cleveland. The latest story that I heard about was just the day before yesterday, where his brother was flying into Texas, Dallas, Texas. And Woodrow Derenberger said, "Are you flying in from the northeast, or are you flying in from the southeast? He said, well, I'm flying in from the northeast. He said, okay, watch. And as they were flying in from the northeast, his brother saw a UFO. His great niece told me that he came up missing for 6 months and said he was with Indrid Cold. Okay? You know, he just continued to have strange experiences. He passed away in 1990 is when he passed away. And he's now buried at Mineral Wells, a little church graveyard in Mineral Wells. When I was doing the Haunted Parkersburg Ghost Tour 10 years ago, I told the story, and his family called me up and they didn't want me to tell it. So I didn't. I stopped telling it until about the Mothman prophecies came out. And I began to tell it again. Now his daughter's writing a book. During the time of the Mothman sightings, I'll tell you this. When I was living pretty close to the Partridges, I was about 10 years old, and my friend and I had Men in Black sightings. We were playing up on the hill, and we saw the Men in Black, 2 Men in Black. And I have a witness. She was with me. And we lived on a hill called Shannon's Knob, and that was where they had all the power for the whole small town. And I had forgotten that for many, many years until I'd read one of Rosemary Guiley's books. But some of these experiences have followed me my whole life, and I think it's kind of a strange thing. Back to the Indrid Cold Woodrow Derenberger tapes. Those tapes were almost thrown away. Glenn Wilson, the reporter that had interviewed Woodrow Derenberger, was retiring, and he thought maybe I'd like to have those. He said he had the videotapes, but they came up missing mysteriously right after the show was aired. He thought the cleaning woman maybe had thrown them away. One year, 2 or 3 years ago, I was doing my ghost tour, and I got a prank phone call, but it was so strange I remembered it. I was listening to my answering machine, and I'll have to tell you about another Men in Black experience I had. I'll tell you that in a few minutes. But I was listening to my answer machine one day during the time we were doing the ghost tour, and there was just a strange voice on there, and it went, "Hi," just like that. And I thought, well, it's just somebody, some silly thing. But I remembered it was so strange. So we were down here in Point Pleasant a year ago, and we were having dinner at Vinegar's, and my friend Virginia had just gotten a new cell phone. And we were sitting there with Rosemary Guiley. And Rosemary Guiley, it was her book. I didn't know Rosemary at the time, but it was Rosemary's book. I was reading about the Men in Black years ago. And that's what jogged my memory, my childhood memory about seeing them as a child. And where we had seen the Men in Black was where the people in the small town I grew up in, which was near the Partridges, was where everyone in town kept saying, "We're seeing a UFO over your house." We didn't see it ourselves, but everyone in town kept saying, "We're seeing this UFO over your house." We lived like on the highest hill in the town, and it's where all the power source for the town was. So anyway, it was Rosemary's book that jogged my memory, and she wrote a book with John Keel. So we were sitting with Rosemary at Vinegar's a year ago, and Virginia's a home health care aide, and she'd just gotten a new cell phone, and her cell phone kept going off. This was a year ago. Her cell phone kept going off. And the number of the person calling was like 411111111. And she was afraid it was her patient trying to call, that they were having trouble with her patient, because her patient was 95 years old. And she didn't know how to play back the recording yet because her phone was brand new. She didn't know how to play back the recording. And I laughingly said, maybe it's Indrid Cold. So we laughed about it. So she got home, and I had never told Virginia about this call with the hi. I'd never told her this, but it was in the back of my mind. So anyway, we got home from Point Pleasant, and the phone rang, and Virginia said, "You got to hear this." So she played the recording, and it was the same voice. It was, and I had just said, maybe it's Indrid Cold. Hi. The story's not done yet. I said, oh, that's really creepy. I got that same phone call. Keep in mind, we're sitting with Rosemary, who writes about the Men in Black, okay? And I just said, maybe it's Indrid Cold. I guess it was February. I was at home. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my phone rang. And I answered the phone, and once again, hi. Same thing. And I star 69, and it was a Point Pleasant number. The only person I know in Point Pleasant was Jeff Walmsley. It wasn't Jeff's number, but I wrote down the number, and I immediately called back. It was disconnected. 3 times I've got that call. But there was a guy following me around in Parkersburg for a long time. He was stalking me, and he was a perfect description of Indrid Cold. He wore a black trench coat, and the hair slicked straight back, and he would come on my ghost tour always the nights that we would play the Indrid Cold tapes. And no one believed me because no one would ever see him but me, okay? So one night they were doing an art auction, and so finally he came to the art auction, and they were selling some of my artwork. He bought my artwork, and I guess he paid for it, and the people there at the art auction said that, and the funny thing about the Men in Black is they're incredibly stupid. This was the stupidest person I have ever met in my life. I mean, he would come to my book signings, but he bought some of my, he would come on every ghost tour. I would play the Indrid Cold tapes, every one. And so he bought my artwork, and the people said that when he paid for my artwork, he did this, and he clasped it to his breast and ran away. And I have never seen him again. It's out in outer space somewhere. I know it is. I know my artwork is on Lanulus in the constellation of Ganymede, because that's where Indrid Cold is supposedly from. So these Men in Black and these things, they continue, and we will never understand this. We will never understand. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.